I insisted on everything. I insisted that we weren't lost. I insisted that we keep going. I insisted that we walk south. Everything had to be my way. And this is where we've ended up. And it's all because of me that we're here now. Hungry, and cold, and hunted.
The Blair Witch Project is a supernatural horror film released by Artisan Entertainment on July 14, 1999. The film was written by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, both of whom directed the film. The film stars Heather Donahue, Michael C. Williams, and Joshua Leonard. While it is safe to say that the found footage style of horror has become something of an oversaturated market, there was once a time where it was still very much a hot novelty. While many people had and continue to have mixed feelings about the Blair Witch Project, its impact on the horror landscape cannot be questioned, as it not only grossed millions at the box office and kick-started a mini franchise, but it is also credited by many as the driving force that led to the popularity of the current-day found footage genre. Not too shabby for what was essentially a student film. So with a reputation that is just as muddled and conflicted as the lore of the movie itself, we have to ask, where does this independent adrenaline pumper find its stride? And where does it earn the ire of its detractors? In this review, we venture off into the dark in search of the answers to the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. Presented through film reel footage recovered after the disappearance of 3 student filmmakers, the film follows the events leading up to their disappearance in October of 1994. The story begins with the 3 students, Heather, Michael, and Joshua, who travel to the town of Burkittsville to interview the local townspeople regarding the Blair Witch. Through their interviews, the trio learn of a hermit who lived in seclusion in the 1940s, and that when 7 children went missing, they would be discovered in his home. The townspeople explain that he would bring 2 children to the basement, having one face the corner, while he killed the second child. As soon as the second child was dead, he would then kill the first. The trio venture to Coffin Rock, a site where 5 men were ritually sacrificed in the late 19th century, to investigate the area for their documentary. Upon arriving to the area, the group trek through the woods in order to find and film a hidden cemetery, filming and commentating on Coffin Rock along the way. The group arrive at the hidden cemetery after camping out for the night, though tension begins to brew as Heather's map-reading abilities appear questionable. After filming the cemetery, where Mike accidentally knocks over one of the 7 rock cairns meant to act as a grave marker, they tuck in for the night. During the night, the group are awoken by the sound of movement in the woods. The group calls out, but they receive no reply. The next morning, the trio decide to pack up and leave, believing that they're being sabotaged by the locals. As the day progresses, and Heather reveals they're taking a different path to get back to the car, it becomes clear that the group will have to camp for another night, causing Josh and Mike to start losing their patience. The noises from last night return, and just like last night, the group are unable to locate the source. But when they awake the next morning, 3 rock cairns have been arranged outside their tent. The group agree to get out of there as quickly as they can, though Heather is disappointed to be leaving amidst all the action. Just before they leave, Heather tells Mike and Josh that she can't find the map. Later on in the day, after being forced to follow the creek with no success, Mike reveals he kicked the map into the creek out of frustration, leading to a fight breaking out with the group. Before the group set up camp for the night, they run into an area of woods with countless effigies made of sticks and twine hanging from the trees. During the night, the trio are set upon by what sounds like a group of young children, who force them to flee into the woods when their tent becomes surrounded. After spending the rest of the night outside, the group returned to their campsite, cleaning up their trashed belongings and carrying on. As the day progresses, the group begin to slowly lose their composure, with Josh being affected worst of all. This comes to a head when just before nightfall, the group, despite walking south for hours that day, end up right back where they started. Josh goes missing in the night, and though Mike and Heather try to find him, they are forced to carry on without him. When night falls again, Mike and Heather begin to hear Josh crying out to them from the woods. Though they chase after him, they cannot find him, and are forced to accept that whatever they're hearing may not be Josh at all. Heather finds a bundle of twigs wrapped in Josh's clothing the next morning, and when she unravels the bundle, she finds a severed tongue, finger, and teeth wrapped inside. Heather decides not to tell Mike what she saw. When night falls again, Heather records a message for Mike's, Josh's, and her family, accepting responsibility for their situation and tearfully apologizing for allowing it to go so far. In the final moments of the movie, Heather and Mike, having heard Josh call out to them again, stumble upon a house. They head inside, following Josh's cries for help. When Mike runs down to the basement in pursuit, Heather chases after him, breaking down into hysterics as she does. Upon getting to the basement, Heather sees Mike standing in the corner, facing the wall. The camera is knocked from Heather's hand, and the reel runs out. Well, if nothing else, it's pretty clear to see why this movie's such a mixed bag when it comes to people's opinions on it. The movie's an amateur's outing in every sense of the word. The quality of the technical work is quite literally the bare minimum, to the point that in some places certain elements of movie making are completely non-existent. It's understandable why people would not like the movie, as it is pretty hokey and scrappy in its execution. But that is exactly why, when you look at it in the right context, it works so perfectly. The cinematography of this movie is quite literally as bare bones as you can get. The lighting is literally flashlights used by the characters to navigate in the dark, while during the day you literally just have whatever light is available from the sun. There's nothing to speak of in terms of angles chosen for shots, or any kind of techniques and transitions, as the shots are literally just the camera up on a character's shoulder, and the transitions are the jump cuts in the reel. The camera, being designated as a rental, creates grainy footage that lends towards the home movie style of recording, and given how the camera bobs up and down constantly, unless the characters are stopped dead, this means you're not going to get any visual clarity to speak of. Given that a significant chunk of the movie is shot at night on top of this, there are moments in the movie where there is quite literally nothing to see. The production value is not even worth touching on. The film is shot in the woods with a couple of random interviews spliced in with extras occupying the beginning of the movie. This movie doesn't go anywhere that any low-budget startup hasn't been before. There's a minimal number of low-quality strung-together props throughout, and there are no special effects of any kind beyond whatever shows up in lens distortions. There's no soundtrack beyond the beginning and ending credits of the movie, and the audio effects used to convey things like a presence in the woods are literally just the sounds of people walking around and shouting at each other. The pacing of this movie is very stop and go. Given that the film is presented as a series of found footage reels, the cobbled together shots essentially come together as a series of incredibly abrupt jump cuts. This gives the audience a pretty good case of whiplash, as the movie at times seems to transition right out of scenes when they're in the middle of them. So in pretty much every sense of the word, this movie is really nothing to look at. And that's exactly why it's almost perfect. Because the places where this movie's strengths shine are in what you don't see. The setup for this movie is perfectly executed in that it not only tells you exactly what you're looking at, thus making any technical or production quality a moot point, but it also sets up the exact reason why the student filmmakers ended up where they did. While the initial setup with interviews is as minimal as can be from a storytelling perspective, it's an approach that's rewarding in the long run, as it tells you everything you need to know before things begin, and nothing you don't. The greatest strength of this movie lies in the atmosphere it creates. Getting lost in the woods is a fear that most people can immediately identify with, but then to have something following you is one that activates fear in even the bravest of people. The low production value is fully used to the filmmaker's advantage, as the distant movements, shouts, and screams that echo through the night will send chills down your spine. Is it a pack of animals? Is it disgruntled townfolk trying to ward off who they think are trespassers? Is it something supernatural? Or is it something more sinister? Even at the end of the stop-and-go footage, the characters never find out who or what is following them, and the only clues they are offered via the rock cairns and wooden effigies do nothing but raise more questions. The more you see, the less you know. And given how you're never allowed to see what's happening or why, that's what makes the anxiety this movie produces so palpable. The actors here deserve all the credit they can get, as without them and their improvised style of back and forth, the film would not have worked as well as it did. While the dialogue of this movie's pretty straightforward, never offering the audience any hints of grandiose or revelatory musing, the basic nature of it allows the film to focus more on the unseen horrors that follow. The group start off as an awkward bunch who do their best to break the ice while still being professional. But as more time passes, and the characters become more and more lost, they begin to go through some motions that feel uncomfortably familiar to a lot of us. The tense bickering devolves into some pretty heated and savage arguments as things degrade, and we can almost feel the characters becoming withdrawn and broken down the more physically and mentally drained they become. Despite their best efforts, the back and forth between these characters often breaks down into fighting, just as it would in such a desperate situation. And given how much more aggressive and unwavering their pursuer becomes over time, the group's ability to bounce back becomes less and less. As far as a first-time, limited-scope effort in filmmaking is concerned, this one is more than memorable. The final rating for this late-night walk in the woods is 8 out of 10. Though the overall lack of storytelling structure, jerky pacing, and low-quality technical work can be jarring at times, the movie more than makes up for this with grounded but potent acting, a stomach-knotting anxiety and dread courtesy of an unforgettable atmosphere, and an uncanny feeling that this situation might be a little more real than we want to admit. If you want to see just how much a film can test the limitations of the less is more approach to horror, then you need not look further than the Blair Witch Project. I'm serious. Don't look further than that. The rest of the franchise really isn't worth the effort. That's all we've got for today. Thanks for stopping by. If you feel it's worth the while, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. And if there's a movie you want to see reviewed, leave your suggestions down in the comments. Also, if you're feeling especially generous, consider following me on Twitter @Untrained for updates and other nonsense. There's plenty more to come, so if you care enough to return for it, then I'll see you when I see you.